What's up? This is Ray. Welcome back. Hey, we got a really cool episode today. This is something I've been working on for weeks, especially if you're into analog film photography, which I've been doing more and more of lately. We're going to be looking at the Lomography Sprocket rocket. And what's unique about this camera is Lomography calls it the world's first camera dedicated to wide sprocket photography. I hope I quoted that right. So what's unique about this camera is it exposes the entire negative, including the sprockets, not just the little area in the center that most 35mm cameras will do. It gives a very unique look. It's also very wide, so it would be interesting to use for panoramas and things like that. So if you're curious about this camera, I'm going to show you everything I learned about it, the pros and cons, and how to use it to the best of its ability. But keep in mind, Lomography doesn't call this a toy camera, but it really is a toy camera, because think about it. The lens is plastic. There's only one element. It has very few controls. So this camera is really for having fun with. You're not supposed to think too much when you use this camera. You just aim, focus, and shoot and enjoy the results. And what's interesting, I'm going to do an unfair comparison in this review. I'm going to compare it to a very high quality 35mm camera. This is the Rollei XF35, and it uses a 5-element Carl Zeiss Sonner lens. So I shot several images side by side with both cameras. I'm also going to show you those just so you can get an idea what a high quality lens looks like compared to a single element toy camera. So yeah, there's not a lot of proper reviews of this sprocket rocket out there from what I can see. So this, in my opinion, is going to be the most thorough sprocket rocket review ever. So if you're curious, stick around. We'll get right into it. Okay, so here are the specs of the camera, and keep in mind this review is coming from me, who normally shoots high quality medium format images. This camera has a lot of limitations. For example, it only has 2 apertures. The widest aperture is f10.8, and that's the cloudy setting. The smallest aperture is f16, so you can already see that it's not made for low light. The only shutter speed it has is 1/100th of a second, which is actually good, because a lot of times these cameras, these type of toy cameras, have maybe 1/130th or 1/60th. So with 1/100, you should be able to kind of freeze motion. One thing that I didn't know, when I was looking at the Lomography website and I was buying this camera, I decided to buy some film with it. So I bought color negative 100. It wasn't until I got the camera, took it out the box, and started reading the instructions that it said that the shutter and aperture speed are designed to be used with 1/400 ISO film. So it didn't say that on the Lomography website, so I bought the wrong type of film. So that's something to keep in mind. Because of these smaller apertures, you want to use a faster film, 400, and surprisingly, the exposures came out good enough considering the limitations of it. Okay, so the most important thing we're going to talk about with this camera is image quality. And I got to be honest, when I first developed this and looked at the first image, I was somewhat disappointed, because I was comparing it. All I knew was a glass lens with 10 whatever elements in it that was so corrected. The center of this image, I have to say, is very sharp, especially for a plastic lens. But immediately as it spreads out, the sharpness turns to blurry fuzz, and also there's a lot of vignetting in the corner. It gets darker in the corner because this one element, this one plastic element, there's no corrections in it. So that's kind of the character of it, of a toy camera, is sharp in the center, blurry in the edges. That's something to understand. Some people love it. So yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. The image quality is not superb. You may want to shoot a landscape or a panorama with this, and when those outer edges are so out of focus and blurry, it doesn't cater to every kind of photo. So I recommend, whatever you're shooting, make sure the subject is right in the middle. And And also there's a lot of distortion because there's no elements to correct it. If there's any straight lines in it, like a sidewalk or something or a fence, it will bow pretty severely. A lot of people love that look. It looks cool. It's full of character, but it depends on what you want and what you're going for. It really caught me off guard, and at first I wasn't impressed with it at all. But talking to some of my friends and showing some of my friends the pictures, they were like, wow, that's incredible. It looks fabulous. So that's the whole point of using a toy camera, is perfection. Is we don't want, someone who loves this camera is not looking for perfection. They're looking for a unique look and a character. And as you can see from these images, it gives a very unique look. Okay, so next thing I'm going to show you the way you load the film. It's very basic. It's exactly like any other camera, except the back door has 2 clips on each side. You release both clips and it comes off just like this. Just like any other camera, you put the film in on this side, you pull it across, stick it into the slot here and wind. But the way the counter works, that is different. Let me show you that next. All right, so next thing I'm going to show you is how to advance the film. This knob right here on the far right, you turn it and it advances the film. But the film counter isn't accurate. That's not what you go by to tell when to stop at that image, because as you wind it, it doesn't stop automatically. What Lomography did, they created this window right here. So as you turn it, as you advance the film, you wait and wait until you see a white dot appear in the window, and that's when you stop. Because then you'll have the correct spacing between frames. Also, because there's no double exposure prevention, you can take photos by accident on top of the one you took before. And there was a time, I think I took maybe, I'm going to show you an image where I didn't remember if I advanced it or not. So I just advanced it anyway, just to make sure. And I think on that roll, I wound up with 5 or 6 blank frames because I didn't remember where I advanced it or not. So the routine I've gotten into is as soon as I take a photo, I immediately advance it. That way there's no confusion whether I advance it or not. So that's another one of the limitations of this camera, is the advanced mechanism. You really want to have to get into a routine of how to make sure you remember that you advance it or not, so you don't double expose an important photo. Oh, I almost forgot. I want to show you some kind of side-by-side images where I took this sprocket rocket out. I took together with this Rollei XF with the Carl Zeiss lens. So I'm going to show you some images back to back with each one, so you can see the difference between the toy lens and the professional lens. It's not a fair comparison because the Rollei is not a wide angle lens and it's not showing the sprockets, but you can still see how in the corners the Rollei lens is sharp mostly all the way through unless it's shot wide open, and you can kind of see the more distortion. I think it's important to show these two side by side so you can really see the difference in character from this toy lens to a Rollei. So check these out. All right, so this is something important to talk about. To get the most out of this camera, remember it shoots the entire negative. It shows the sprocket. So wherever you send this film to get developed, you want to make sure they know it is an entire negative, and they're not just going to put it in their normal scanning system that would crop out the sprockets. So if you're going to be doing this yourself, it's very important that you have a system of putting it on your scanning bed. That way it'll stay flat. You may want to put a glass pane on top of it, but that's not the perfect way to scan a negative because it's supposed to be a few millimeters above the glass. So what I use to scan it is the Lomography Digitaliza set. I did a review of it. I'll probably put a link somewhere here. It it holds the negative right by the very edges and clamps it down with a magnet so it's as flat as possible, so that when you scan it, you get a more accurate scan and you can still see those cool sprockets. So that's something very important to consider, is how you're going to get it developed and scanned, and making sure that the entire negative is scanned properly. I'll put a link to the Digitaliza below, as well as this sprocket rocket, if you're interested in getting one. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is how to adjust the shutter speed. There's only one shutter speed of 1/100th, and on top of the lens there's a switch from N, normal, to B, which is bulb. But keep in mind, there's no cable release on here, so any professional photographer know when you use bulb, you want to use a cable release on a tripod so that the camera doesn't shake when you press it down the shutter. Since there's no cable release on here, you're not really going to use this for serious handheld bulb. So keep it in normal mode, and make sure you don't accidentally switch it to bulb when you're taking it out of your bag like I did, because I think I took maybe 6 photos in bulb, not realizing they all came out overexposed. It was a mess. You're going to make some mistakes using this the first time, so keep it in normal setting. Next thing I want to show you is the flash. The flash works perfectly normal, but watch this. Watch when I press down on the shutter. Watch what happens. It fires just like it normal. But watch when I release the shutter. You notice how it fired twice? The shutter is so basically designed that it closes the circuit not just on the way down, but also when you're releasing your finger on the way up. It's not the end of the world, but it just shows that it is really a toy camera in the way they designed it. It doesn't have all the mechanisms that another camera would have to prevent certain things from happening. So those are 2 things I wanted to point out. All right, so how to focus the sprocket rocket. It only has a basic zone focusing system. On the far left, the minimum focusing distance is 0.6 meters to 1 meter. And in the other direction, on the far right, it's 1 meter to infinity. So that means everything in between you kind of have to guess. But fortunately, because it's a very small aperture, most things should be in focus. It just gets kind of tricky if you're focusing on something up close, knowing exactly where that sweet spot is. But that's another one of the limitations of the sprocket rocket. One thing I have to point out though is, if you're serious about your sprocket photography and you want the best image quality, you really want to put that 35 millimeter film not in a toy camera but in a medium format camera. There's adapters that you can put on your 35 millimeter film edges, and it will fit into your medium format, and you're going to get much better image quality because you have that proper glass lens, and the film is going to be running in the middle of the image circle, so that's where all of the sharpness lies anyway. And I'm going to show you some images that I shot through my Rolleicord with 35 millimeter film, and they're sharp and accurate all the way throughout because of that great lens that's on it. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Sprocket photography, in my opinion, this is the world's first sprocket camera, but I think sprocket photography really deserves a better quality camera also. And I think it would really be good if Lomography made a professional version of this, where you can actually unscrew this lens and put on a rangefinder lens like a Jupiter or something with an L39 mount. And the reason I say that is because rangefinder lenses don't have that mirror box, so that they will fit flush on here and fit perfectly. So yeah, if Lomography, if you can make one of these with a removable L39 mount, you would really probably have a cult following for this camera, because it'll open up all other kinds of opportunities for lenses that could go on it. Even if you want to charge more for it, people would buy it. They would be interested. I'm definitely sure there's a big market, I think, for sprocket photography. So keep those things in mind. All right, so that is my thorough review of the Lomography Sprocket Rocket. I kind of tried to make this the most thorough Sprocket Rocket video ever, and I hope it is. I hope I didn't forget anything. If I did, feel free to leave some questions below. I'm going to put a link to Lomography store where you can get this camera. If I remember correctly, I think it's $65, or is it $85? I'm going to put the price up here. I should have researched that before. But yeah, thanks for watching, and keep in mind, no matter what camera you use for your 35 millimeter photography to get your the character and quirky looks to it, or whatever film you use, keep in mind. Until next time, keep it real.